You're welcome to Lizama Stitches. My name is Amaka. If you're yet to subscribe to this channel, please subscribe and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so that whenever I upload new videos, you'll be notified. In this tutorial, we'll be learning how to make a BUBU gown. So let's get started. I've folded my fabric into two and I have my front and my back panel here. Now this is my front panel and this is the back panel. Now this is the folded edge. Now this is my starting point. From my starting point, I'm going to take my hip measurement. My hip measurement is 25 inches. Now this is my hip measurement. And the length of the gown is 38 inches. This is my hemming allowance. My hemming allowance is 2 inches. Now for you to know the amount of fabric you'll be working with, you need to take your shoulder measurement divided by 2 plus your sleeve length. Now the shoulder measurement I'm working with is 15 inches. 15 divided by 2 gives you 7.5 inches. Now this is 7.5 inches plus 8 inches for my sleeve length. Now this is 8 inches, which gives you 15.5 inches plus 1 inch seam allowance gives you 16.5 inches. Another way you can do this is by taking your measurement from your center back to wherever you want your sleeve to end. From this point, I'm going to come down by 2 inches for my shoulder slants. Now from my shoulder slant, I'm going to take my round sleeve measurement. The round sleeve I'm working with is 14 inches. 14 divided by 2 gives you 7 inches. Now this is it, 7 inches. I'm going to come down by 1 inch for my seam allowance. Now I'm going to take my neck measurement. The neck width I'm working with is 3 inches. My neck width is 3 inches and my neck depth is 4 inches. I'm going to connect it. Now my back neck width is also 3 inches. Then the neck depth is 1 inch. Let me change this chalk. From the front neck depth, I'm going to come down by 4 inches for my slit, because I'm going to slit the front. So I'm going to mark 4 inches for the slit. Next thing I'm going to do is to connect the shoulder slant to the neck line. Now this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to connect this point to this point. Remember, I have 1 inch seam allowance here, which I'm going to use to turn my sleeve. From this point, I'm going to come in by 2 inches. I'm going to come down to my hip line. Now there are different ways of doing this. You can use a quarter of your hip circumference. That is your hip circumference divided by 4, and add 2 inches or 3 inches for ease. but this gown is a BUBU gown. It's supposed to be very free, so I'm not really going to use my hip measurements for this. I'm going to use the same measurement I took here. That's what I'm going to use on the hip, but I'm going to minus 2 inches from this measurement, from the 16.5 inches. That 15.5 inches I have here, that's what I'm going to use here, but I'm going to minus 2 inches from it. Now 16.5 inches minus 2 inches gives you 14.5 inches. So this is 14.5 inches. Now on this point, I'm going to take I'll be working with my hip measurements. Now my hip circumference is 40 inches. 40 divided by 4 gives you 10 inches. Plus 1 inch for ease gives you 11 inches. Plus 1 inch seam allowance gives you 12 inches. So I'm going to mark 12 inches here. And I'll do the same thing here. Now from this point, I'm going to come up by 2 inches. Now I'm going to connect this point to this point and this point to this point. Remember that from this point I came up by 2 inches. So from this 2 inches point, I'm connecting this point to this point with my hip curve. Now there's another thing I want to do. I want this part of my gown. I want my gown to be fitted around the waist. I want my gown to be fitted around the waist. So I'm going to be working with my vertical waist measurement. Now my vertical waist measurement is 17 inches. 17 inches. I want it to be a little bit curvy. Not that I want it to be fitted. I want it to be a little bit, I want my gown to be a little bit curvy. So from my chest, from here, I'm going to mark my waist point. Now this is my waist point. My waist point is 17 inches. My waist point is 17 inches. Now from this waist point, I'm going to come in by 1 inch. Just for me to be able to shaping it a little. Now I came in by 1 inch. So I'm going to connect this point to this point and this point to this point with my hip curve. Now this is how I'll do it. I'll connect this point to this point. Then I'll connect this point to this point. But this is optional. You can decide not to do this. It's still okay. So you see that it's a little bit curvy. So I'm going to blend this point so that I don't have any sharp edges. From this point, I'm going to mark 9 inches for my pocket because this gown is going to have pockets. Nine inches. This is my 9 inches. And my pocket is going to be 7 inches. So from this 9 inches mark, I'm going to mark 7 inches. So I'm going to cut it. I'm going to start by cutting the back first. After cutting the back, then I'll cut the front. Another thing I'm going to do is to add my shoulder seam allowance. I'm using 1/2 inch for my shoulder seam allowance. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to start by cutting the back. After cutting the back, I'll cut the front. Now I've cut it. I'm going to notch. Now I'm going to notch the pocket. After that, I'm going to separate the front from the back. Now this is the back. I'm going to finish the front. So let me complete the front. So I'm going to cut off the neck. I'm going to open the slits. I'll cut the facing. So on the facing, this is the 4 inches. So I'm going to cut it. You can use bias tape to do this, to finish your neckline, but I prefer facing because it gives you a neat finishing. I'm going to mark 3 inches from here. I'm going to mark 3 inches from here. So this is the front facing. This is the front facing. And this is the back. So I'm going to mark 3 inches from here. From here. So this is the back facing. I'm going to place my facing with on the gown, on the dress, right side facing right side. Now this is it. This is the facing. I'm placing it right side facing right side. Now this is how I'll take it to my sewing machine and I'll sew it like this and sew like this. Sew here. I'll sew it. After sewing, I'll notch and I'll turn it. I'm going to do the same thing to the back. Now this is where I notched and this is where I notched. So I'm going to place the pocket this way. I'm going to place it this way. I'll sew it this way. This is the wrong side and this is the wrong side. After sewing, I'll turn it this way and top stitch on the line and top stitch on the pocket. So I'm going to place it this way and I'll place it this way and sew it. So this is how I'll sew it. That is after sewing the facing. After sewing the facing, notching and ironing, I'll sew the pocket. I'll sew the pocket and I'll sew here. I'll sew here and here. I'm going to fold in this hand. I'm going to fold in the sleeve. You know I have 1 inch. I have 1 inch here. I'm going to use that 1 inch to sew here. Then I'm going to hem here. I'm going to hem here with 2 inches. I have 2 inches hemming allowance here, so I'm going to hem here. The same thing I will do to this part. That is what I'll do here.